and had his speech and a lecture. Personally, he was stopped in New York, as I told you, by the customers and Homeland Security, and now he is in safe house in New York, and hopefully he gets soon back home to Vancouver, Canada. He has promised that he will come in October, so I can mention that Kevin is one of the 10 nominees of this Prague Peace Prize 2016, and all of the nominees who accept the prize will receive the prize, so hopefully all 10 will accept and receive the prize. Those who have accepted it and received it on 22nd of July, it's from here, Harald Kautz, or you know Harald as Harald Kautzweiler, but Harald Kautz is his current name. Then it is Ole Dammegård who spoke in the morning, George Green who spoke yesterday, and today would speak Kevin Annett, but he was stopped, prevented from giving a speech here today. And on 9th of October, Sunday 9th of October, Fritz Springmeier has accepted and he has promised to come. Jim Mars has accepted and he believes that he can make it to 9th of October. And I want just say that the day before, on Saturday the 8th of October, David Icke, who is also nominated, has his speech here, or he's on the worldwide tour, a worldwide Wake Up tour. So he will speak here in this particular conference room, Lucerna Great Hall, on 8th of October, but it's not arranged by us from Illusion to Reality. But I highly recommend to come and listen to David Icke because he's a wonderful speaker and I really admire him. Kevin Annett, he is waiting on Skype from New York. He will speak about crimes of church and state, satanic rituals, and he will speak about common law courts, how we could start common law courts, and he has promised to come on 9th of October and speak here in this great hall of Lucerna. So now I will connect Kevin. Hello, Kevin. Can you hear us? You can hear us?
Yes, I can.
Or me? Okay.
Thank you, Alexandra, and it's a real honor to be speaking to all of you. I only regret that it's not in person, although, as you mentioned, I will be present in October. What I want to speak about today is of great urgency because it involves innocent lives. On August 15th, as has happened every year for perhaps centuries, a satanic cult known as the Ninth Circle, which operates in the highest level of the Roman Catholic Church, this Ninth Circle will be conducting human sacrificial killings in at least 4 cities. We know in Montreal, Washington, D.C., in London, and Rome, there will be ritual killings in the major Catholic churches in those cities. This is documented from insiders, from Vatican documents, and from lawsuits we have brought through our common law court system. Now, the Ninth Circle has been operating since at least the 17th century, established by the Jesuits as a psychological warfare weapon, but also as a way to blackmail and control incumbent popes. And the Ninth Circle operates internationally. One of the ways that we can fight this is by not only exposing the crime, as so many of you are involved in doing, but in actually bringing common law court cases to bear on this crime involving the highest level of elites in political, economic, religious circles. We have done so successfully on 2 occasions, and I'll be talking about that today, how we establish common law courts to actually force the resignation of many of these people, including Pope Benedict in 2013. But before we get to that, I want to give some background for those of you who aren't completely aware of how we got to this point. For me, it began over 20 years ago in Canada, and I should mention that what I'll be saying today is based on 2 of my most recent books. The first being called Murder by Decree, The Crime of Genocide in Canada, and a more personal description of this, it's called Unrelenting, Between Sodom and Zion. Both of these books can be obtained on Amazon.com, and of course I'll be bringing them with me in October. But in the book I describe how almost 25 years ago now, as a Protestant clergyman and newly ordained minister in Canada, I went to the west coast of Canada with my young family, and there began to work among the Aboriginal people of a town called Port Alberni, which traditionally was the site of the largest missionary invasion in Canada. After only 1 generation of the arrival of white missionaries there in the mid-19th century, over 90% of the Indian people had died, either through smallpox, deliberate disease, or the setting up of prison camps called Indian residential schools, where over half the children never returned. I began to discover this by my daily contact as a minister in Native communities. And it was a very personal encounter. For one thing, I was regularly called out to the Indian reservations to do funerals for young Native teenagers who had killed themselves, young babies who had died suddenly. The death rate in Native communities in Canada is still higher now than it was 50 or 100 years ago. It's as high as you find in indigenous communities in Thailand or Brazil. It's a war of extermination that's still going on against the Native people. And as I began to learn these things, I had to ask myself, where was it all coming from? And I didn't know at the time that the church I was part of, the United Church of Canada, as well as the Anglican Church, the Church of England, and the Roman Catholic Church were all part of a plan of deliberate extermination that began in the year 1891. It was formalized by a plan with the Canadian government and the Crown of England in the year 1910. And its plan was to exterminate at least half the Native children in these so-called schools in order to grab the lands and resources of the natives, but also to destroy the culture, to commit genocide. And of course, genocide is when you not only kill people, but create conditions where their culture is going to be exterminated over the long term by preventing them from practicing their language, by preventing them from being themselves. And this, in a way, you could say is happening to everyone on the planet now through this corporate oligarchy that is turning the entire population of the earth into components of a corporate consumer machine. Now, we'll get into more of that, of course, but for me, when I encountered one piece of that crime in Canada, it began to open many other doors. I invited these Native survivors of these residential school crimes into my church. I allowed them to speak from my pulpit. This would be between the years 1992 and 1995. During that time, because my church was growing all the time because of the new people I was bringing in, I didn't face opposition from the local white church people, but eventually I wrote a letter to the church that sealed my fate. That letter described how our early missionaries had grabbed much of the land of the native people, and then later the church sold that land off to many different corporations for a lot of money. And when I discovered that had been going on, I wrote a letter to the national church about that, and within 2 weeks I was summarily fired, without cause, without notice, eventually forced out of the United Church and defrocked, I think is the word. But more than that, because they knew that I was sitting on top of all of this evidence, they did everything possible to destroy my life. They went to my wife and encouraged her to divorce me, and even actually paid for her divorce. They made sure my children were taken from me. They were only 6 and 3 years old at the time, my 2 daughters. They started a complete blacklisting campaign that is still in effect, and a public character assassination. The kinds of things that happen to any whistleblowers who take on these powers. And so within a year I was impoverished, without work. Everyone was afraid to speak to me. And yet, because of that, I gained more credibility in the Native community, and more survivors began to come to me. So it's strange, when one door closes, another tends to open if you stand on the truth and you pursue that truth relentlessly. And that's one of the reasons I call my new book Unrelenting, because that's what happened. I stayed at this, I didn't give up, and the powers that be continued to try to destroy not only me, but the Native people who began to work with me. Because over the next 10 to 15 years, in Canada, we built a movement that actually forced the government eventually to admit some of these crimes and issue a pseudo-apology in the year 2008 for the residential school crimes. We also forced an international movement to come into being, which forced Pope Benedict to resign in February 2013 after we adjudicated a common law court case to bring him down. Now, I want to say, and it's very important to understand, that none of this happens simply by uncovering evidence and publishing it. Now, of course, I don't mean the word simply to minimize that. It's a huge task to bring out crimes of the powerful, because everything in society is arrayed against you. The media, the academic world, your friends, anyone who's even considers themselves an activist is influenced not to have anything to do with you. And don't forget, our adversary is very powerful in a worldly sense, although I learned very quickly that we are engaged not simply in a worldly battle, but a spiritual battle. And the tools of the Spirit, of course, is not only love and truth, but courage, and recognizing that the powers of creation, some call it the natural law, the law of God, stand with those who are for justice and the truth, and that nothing that the world throws at us can destroy us once we stand on that truth consistently. And most importantly, the truth carried by the victims, by the eyewitnesses, who we must always hold up and protect. And that became much of the work I did. In Canada, as I mentioned, after I was fired and we began to build a movement, based at first in Vancouver on Canada's west coast, where so many of the survivors are based, the Aboriginal people. Fortunately, I had been working for many years prior to my being fired as a street minister in Vancouver, and I knew many of these Native people who were eyewitnesses to these residential school crimes, who had lived through these killings and the tortures. They had buried fellow students at the schools. They knew where these mass graves were. We began to document these crimes. We began to protest outside the Anglican, the Catholic, and the United churches on Sunday mornings. Eventually, we even began to occupy these churches peacefully during their Sunday services and began to generate a lot of news coverage because of that. And we learned that there's only 2 things that really can bring down the powerful, because like any corporation, the churches or the government or the Crown of England or the Pope respond only to 2 kinds of pressure: threats to their money and threats to their public image or reputation. And we began to threaten both, not only by occupying those churches, but by launching court cases, common law court cases against them, and letting the evidence be known all over the world. And very quickly the churches began to respond. In Canada, by the year 1996, I was involved in bringing the first lawsuits against these churches. It resulted in something called the Brenner decision in the British Columbia Supreme Court that found that the churches and governments of Canada were guilty of all of these crimes against children. We're not just talking physical and sexual assault, but murder, medical experimentation, sterilization programs, all of the things described as genocide by International Human Rights Convention, all of those things occurred in these so-called schools, which continued in Canada until the year 1996. And still today, the effects are continuing. Native children are still being taken from their homes, trafficked. Native people are still being forced off their land at gunpoint by private companies, private armies hired by corporations to get their land. We know these private armies operate especially in British Columbia. Chinese cartels hire private death squads to force Native people off their land to get the uranium, the oil, the water, and the hydroelectricity. All of that is still going on, and it can happen in Canada because of not only these crimes that have occurred in the past, but because of a regime in Canada under something called the Indian Act, which is an apartheid legislation. It says that Indian people on reservation are not citizens. They're wards of the state, wards of the crown, which means they're children under the law. They have no legal rights. And so this system of legal discrimination and racism is still continuing in Canada in violation of international law, and it's what allows a lot of these Aboriginal killings and disappearances to still continue today. And in fact, if you look online at murderbydecree.com, you'll see that in our recent research that we put out to counter the government propaganda and cover-up that's going on, murderbydecree.com shows that these continuing crimes against Native people is directly being orchestrated by multinational corporations and the Crown of England. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But as we began to bring up these crimes and the government had to respond in the year 2008, lots more began to come out. And after the government was forced to issue a formal apology in Parliament in Canada in 2008, there was an attempt in Canada to simply cover it all up, to say that, oh, we've resolved this now, we've given money and apology to some of the survivors, and now the issue is over. And a lot of Canadians lost interest. But at the same time, as I mentioned, a new door began to open, and that came from Europe. And the summer of 2010, I was invited by groups of survivors of Catholic Church crimes in Ireland to come and assist them. And of course, I had had a long tradition there. My family came from Ireland. My great-grandfather was forced onto a ship at gunpoint by the British in 1880. His entire family was forced off their land, and all of them died of starvation on the ship to Canada. My great-grandfather was an orphan when he landed on the docks in Montreal. So I said to the Irish people in Dublin who I was speaking to, my ancestors, my O'Neill ancestors, were victims of the same genocide that happened to the Native people in Canada, and so we have a commonality of suffering that brought me here today to speak in Dublin. Now in Ireland, as you know, or may not know, the Irish people suffered much of the same genocide as the Native people. It was the same Crown of England and Vatican responsible for these crimes, using the same methods. And I was invited by those who had survived not just the sexual assaults of priests, but actual extermination and child trafficking that's still going on today. One of the things we discovered, and this was in the news very soon after we forced Pope Benedict to resign in 2013, an underground chamber had been discovered near Tuam in Ireland, which is on the west coast, near a Catholic orphanage. And in that cistern, that underground chamber, was found the remains of over 500 children, newborn and young children. And the news media said simply that there were remains. Nobody knew how they got there. But our contacts in the Irish police told us that those skeletons had been dismembered, that they had been chopped up and decapitated, and some of the skulls were missing. That's a classic sign of satanic ritual killing. And as we published this, it was interesting, the same week that we brought that out in the news media, in September 2012, the top cardinal in Ireland, Sean Brady, was forced to resign because he had been involved in covering up those crimes. As a young priest, he had been situated in that area, and there was questions about his involvement in those ritual killings and the protection of priests who had killed children. When we published that, Cardinal Brady resigned the same week. He was one of four top Catholic officials to resign, not only Pope Benedict, but Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone, the second most powerful man in Rome, and the head of the Jesuits, Adolfo Pachon, also resigned after we brought out this information. So it shows you that simply publishing these crimes is part of the weapon we have to at least begin to force a change and put these criminals on the defensive. Now, when we brought out those crimes in Ireland, a whole movement began to build, and it actually helped to establish the network that I presently work with, the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, the ITCCS. You can see its work at itccs.org. Now, this tribunal began as a way to put Pope Benedict on trial, but it has grown into much more since then. In that same year of 2010, groups of survivors of Catholic crimes all over the world began to affiliate to the ITCCS, and it's now based in 9 countries and consists not only of groups of survivors, but police agencies and others who are actually performing citizen arrests on known child raping priests. We have published information showing that the Catholic Church operates according to a standing policy known as Crimen Solicitanus. A document that was actually released to the London Observer newspaper in 2003 shows that this policy of Crimen Solicitanus was established in the year 1929, the same year that the Vatican was established by Mussolini and the Vatican Bank as a so-called state power in Italy, a corporation which is still in existence. The Crimen Solicitanus document says that whenever children are raped or harmed by Catholic priests, the crime is to be silenced and covered up. The police are not to be told, the victim is to be silenced, and the priest is to be protected and perhaps moved to another area. In other words, whenever a priest or a bishop even is put on trial, the courts and the media make it seem like they're acting alone. But in fact, they're acting under a papal order that comes from the Pope in Rome himself. That is a criminal conspiracy. It's in fact the largest criminal conspiracy in the world. It's a criminal conspiracy to protect child rape and child traffickers within the Catholic Church. It is an enormous crime against humanity that implicates not 3 or 4% of the priests, as Pope Francis claims, but 100% of the priests, including Pope Francis himself. Now, Pope Francis was brought in after Pope Benedict in order to do a window dressing, a spin operation, to make it seem like the Catholic Church has changed. That's what any corporation in damage control does. Pope Francis, or Jorge Bergoglio from Argentina, is in fact himself a child trafficker, because when he was the Bishop of Buenos Aires during the 1980s, he was good friends with General Galtieri of the military junta. He helped give the military junta in Argentina a positive face in the world media. At the very same time that 30,000 people, including his own priests, were disappearing and being killed, Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio, protected the junta and openly trafficked the children of political prisoners who were being held in Argentine prisons. That's a crime against humanity, and as a matter of fact, in the second court case that the ITCCS adjudicated, Pope Francis was found guilty of crimes against humanity and, like Pope Benedict, is now subject to citizen arrest at any time for trafficking and murdering children and being active members of the Ninth Circle ritual sacrificial cult. Now, it's important to understand that with the forming of the ITCCS, the movement to expose these crimes went to an international level, and that created a lot of concern on the part of international authorities involved in these crimes. It had expanded out from investigating Indian children in Canada to showing how this pattern of trafficking and murdering children is an old, historic movement that is now an international, a lucrative international business of human trafficking involving tens of millions of people. In fact, the modern slave trade in trafficking human beings is more extensive than it ever was 200 years ago, and more lucrative. It involves big money. We know that a lot of the international cartels, the banks like HSBC, Chase Manhattan, Bank of America, these are all banks that have been convicted of funding international drug traffickers. Well, the same drug traffickers also fund the human trafficking, the child trafficking. We know, for example, when we expose the Ninth Circle killings in Europe, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, the Ninth Circle, which is heavily rooted in the Catholic Church, involves the European Mafia, the 'Ndrangheta, they call themselves. The European Mafia owns a lot of the police forces, including Interpol across Europe. We were given this information because in my book Unrelenting, I describe how soon after we began to convict Pope Benedict and Pope Francis of these crimes through our International Common Law Court of Justice in Brussels, we were approached by eyewitnesses, women like Toos Nijenhuis in Holland, Anne-Marie van Billenberg, who was married to a member of the Ninth Circle in 'Ndrangheta. And they describe in great detail witnessing these ritual killings. And I want to describe that for a few minutes. It's very horrible what they described, how they witnessed in the 1980s and the 1990s, how the Ninth Circle had abducted children from child detention centers in Brussels with the help of the police, all across Holland, the Netherlands, and Belgium, with the help of the Dutch royal family, Queen Beatrix, her two sons, including the fellow who's now the present King of Holland, were all involved in these ritual killings. And Toos and Anne-Marie both described watching, both in private homes and also in fields outside Brussels, how human hunting parties occurred, where young teenagers and even children were forced to run naked through the woods and then hunted by royalty from England, from Belgium and Holland, wealthy billionaires like George Soros, political figures including the Prime Minister and cabinet ministers in the Belgian and Dutch governments. All of these people named by insiders engaged in these ritual killings and huntings of children who were then shot, and then in the case of the boys, their penises cut off and displayed as trophies. The hunting parties were a component of the Ninth Circle because the main Ninth Circle rituals occur on certain days of the year, including on August 15th, which is upcoming, and other dates which we have published. The Ninth Circle will take newborn and young children, rape the children, and then cut their throats, drink the blood, and then even cannibalize the children, eat the flesh. Toos Nijenhuis and Anne-Marie van Billenberg were participants in these ritual killings. Toos was raised in an intergenerational satanic family and has documented this. We have eyewitnesses, police who have corroborated this, eyewitnesses and researchers on the ground who have been taking part in this, who confirm all of that Toos and Anne-Marie have described. Now you can see a lot of their testimonies in this evidence at itccs.org. And in the court records of the International Common Law Court case, the second case that we adjudicated where a lot of this was documented. And in October, when I come to Europe, we will be revealing more of this evidence and how this ongoing crime is continuing to be documented by our Common Law Court case and the ITCCS. You have to bear with me because I'm not used to speaking for an hour-long stretch, so I hope my voice continues, but God willing, it will. The other information I want to share, especially related to the crimes today, is how, our general understanding is that this human trafficking and genocide is not simply a matter of allowing sick people to satisfy themselves on young children. That's almost the cover image that they present. This human trafficking and human slavery and genocide is really about other things as well. It's about big money. We know that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's also about how to get the lands and resources of people. It's also a psychological warfare weapon because we know that when people are traumatized at a young age, when they are sexually assaulted before the age of 3, they are so traumatized that later in life, they're not only easily programmed to be sleeper agents, split personalities that can be controlled and used, But the general population, when facing child abuse and trauma at a young age, are easily controlled. They do not lift their thoughts or their hand against authority. You create a nation of sheep. And that's part of the bigger agenda of child abuse. Child abuse is essential for the domination of any hierarchical elites. They control the population that way. And so this is a political tool that the Catholic Church and elites and governments all over the world have used for many centuries to control their populations. And that's why people wonder, well, why is child abuse so rampant? It's because of this. It's because it's a way to control the population. But finally, there's an even more basic element to all of this, and that's the spiritual aspect. And in my book on relenting, I describe how over the years I began to learn that the spiritual force and power behind this has to do with that which is unseen. The entity that runs this world, some call it Satan, some call it the principalities and powers, but this power and entity is committed to the spiritual enslavement of the human race. It's a form of spiritual vampirism, which feeds off our essential spiritual energy and keeps us dominated at a spiritual level. Now, as long as that energy is flowing from ourselves into that power, we're incapable of fighting it. We have to reclaim that power. And it's that reclaiming of not only our minds and our hearts, but our souls, our spiritual power, which is the only thing that can equip us to engage in this fight long term. Because in many of the people that I work with, I've found that they have a lot of worldly courage, but at some point they're shut down. They're frightened off, they are controlled, they disappear. And it's one of the reasons is because they are still spiritually under the influence of this entity, this darkness. Some call it Satan, whatever the word you want to use for it. It is the power ruling the world that is continue to enslave the human race. And our liberation from this is happening. There's forces all over the world today that are breaking free of this and seeing it for what it is. And that gives us great hope, but we also have to be wise in what we're encountering. And many of you are involved in the struggle to expose it. We're all touching different parts of it. But now is a time for all of us to unite and bring together our understandings and overcome the false divisions that they create between us to keep us divided and allow our energy to continue to be drained. Once the people begin to take back not only their political and legal power, but their personal and their spiritual power, these entities fall. The governments fall, the corporate, the churches, the Church of Rome will fall, as it's begun to fall already. The oldest corporate power on earth, we have shown, can be brought down and put on the defensive by engaging in the spiritual as well as legal and political battle and personal battle against it. That's the general point I wanted to share because it's very important to remember that in the course of all the work we do. Now, moving along with that in mind, I want to describe a bit more of how our common law courts have actually been brought into being, how they forced the Pope to resign, and how they're a tool today. Now, part of the verdict of the first common law court case, it was convened in the year 2012 by the ITCCS. The first case had to do with the crimes of genocide in Canada, which we so thoroughly documented. The common law court was convened like any court. A statement of claim was issued by myself and others in Brussels. It was stated that we were charging the Crown of England, the churches of Canada, the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, and the government of Canada with crimes against humanity and with a criminal conspiracy to cover up that crime. We issued a summons against 30 defendants, including Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, Queen Elizabeth, Elizabeth Windsor, Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, and other top officials of church and state in Canada and around the world. That summons went out to them. They did not respond, which is an admission of guilt on their part under a common law court of record that we convened. The lack of response, that when the defendants do not respond to a charge made against them publicly, it's an admission of guilt on that part. It means they're not willing to defend themselves and they're not challenging the charge made against them publicly. None of them ever challenged these charges. We convened the case. We put out a call for citizen jurors. The prosecutor's office presented its case, and you can see that online. We, in fact, have put that together in a DVD set, which you can see online, but it's 4 hours of testimony showing how these churches and government deliberately set out to wipe out the Aboriginal nations in Canada under the guise of religion and education. We showed hard evidence, which you can see online, all of the documents at murderbydecree.com, showing that through the use of smallpox and tuberculosis, these children, the healthy were put in the same room as the sick, and they were killed off through these diseases deliberately. That the reign of terror against these children continued and still continues today, and these crimes against humanity have never stopped. Now, we conducted our trial over the summer and fall of 2012. The jury finally found all of the defendants guilty on 2 counts of crimes against humanity and committing a conspiracy, criminal conspiracy, to cover up those crimes. They were all found guilty, sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole, and what's even more significant was these top officials had their authority and their assets stripped. They were not only removed from their office, but it meant that from now on, the assets of criminal bodies like the Roman Catholic Church could now be seized legally by anybody. Any citizen can walk in to a Catholic church and take the money out of the collection plate and say, this money is being used for criminal purposes to continue to aid and abet child trafficking. Under the United Nations Convention on Transnational Criminal Bodies, it says that the funds of this organization are forfeited. And so that put the Catholic Church in a very defensive position. It's why Pope Benedict then resigned. And the way he resigned was very interesting. In February 2013, our verdict came down. 2 weeks before the verdict was announced, Pope Benedict resigned. The first pope ever to do that in peacetime. We know from a memorandum from the Spanish government that 5 days before Pope Benedict resigned on February 11th, the Spanish government had sent a diplomatic note to the Secretary of State, Tarcisio Bertone, who also resigned from office after this. And the diplomatic note said, based on the evidence of the common law court trial that the ITCCS has finally concluded, that evidence shows that Pope Benedict is guilty of ordering bishops to cover up child trafficking, that he's personally implicated in this crime against humanity, and if he comes on Spanish territory, he may be served with an arrest warrant. 5 days later, Pope Benedict resigns, and he's still hiding in the Vatican. He still will not come out. And people often say, well, why don't you arrest the Pope? The reality is we already have. He's arrested himself. He has not ever emerged from the Vatican, which is not only an enormous admission of guilt, it's proof that we can stop one of the most powerful figures on the planet simply using the common law. Now, we have tried to enforce the arrest warrants after that on these people. They have worked to some degree, not only through the resignation, but by continuing information being shared by insiders in these corporations who have come forward in the wake of our common law case. And a second court case was convened the next year against Pope Francis, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and Adolfo Pichon, the Archbishop, the head of the Jesuits, who resigned in the course of that second court case. And it showed that all of these individuals, including Pope Francis, were active members of the Ninth Circle cult, which traffics and kills children on a ritual basis, that every pope is expected to be involved, at least a participant, if not a witness, to the Ninth Circle, and that has been a practice that's gone on since at least the late 18th century. And these individuals were also found guilty and under the common law court case that finally concluded in the year 2014. Now, these findings of the common law court are not only powerful as statements to force the resignation of these authorities, but the powerful aspect of this is that any court or government in the world can enforce our verdict. Now, if you think about that for a minute, it means that any court in the world can take our findings and issue arrest warrants against Pope Francis. against the members of Drangheta, the Ninth Circle, the governments, the Queen of England. All of these people are now subject to arrest. Now, even if the people of the world don't believe this, these people in authority do believe it, and they know it's true, because under common law, no one is above the law. People often say in Canada and England, well, you can't arrest the Queen. That's true under her law, but any individual under common law is subject to arrest for either civil or criminal acts. That means if the Queen hurts somebody, she can be arrested. If she commits crimes, which she has done, and I'm going to mention that in a minute, what Queen Elizabeth has done that warranted her prosecution, anyone who commits those crimes can be convicted under the common law. The common law being the law of nature, the law of God. It's an English term, so something Europeans may not be as familiar with. But the common law simply arises naturally. It's the same law which allows you to not participate in unjust laws in your government. There's nothing requiring you to pay taxes or obey laws of government which go against the natural law of justice, the law that says we shall harm no one. We shall live in peace and equality with one another. That is higher than statute law that governments bring in, which they make you think is the highest law. But no, statute law, as the United States Supreme Court has said, no statute issued by a government is lawful if it does not have the consent of the citizens. And that statement by Oliver Wendell Holmes, the American Supreme Court Justice in 1922, said that no citizen anywhere in the world shall obey the laws of their government if they do not consent to those laws. The government may arrest you, but that is an act of a tyrant. And that is a very powerful weapon we have, because we've used it time and again. And the proof, as we say in Canada, the proof is in the pudding. It's in the proof of the resignation of these people and the fact that the authorities of the world are now very nervous about how we set up and operate these common law courts, because they know they can be arrested. If enough citizens unite and form our own common law courts, elect our own common law sheriffs to issue these warrants and make the arrests against these people, the truth and the numbers are on our side. It's a matter of enforcing that, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit after I deal with Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth Windsor, on October 10th, 1964, visited the Kamloops Catholic Indian School in British Columbia. According to two eyewitnesses, William Coombs and Jesse Jules, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip took 10 children from that school on a picnic down to a place called Dead Man's Creek. The children were drugged and taken away, and they were never seen again. These were 7 boys and 3 girls. 10 children. October 10th, 1964, if you add up the numbers, it all equals 10. 10 children. This cult of significance of the number 10 is very important because it was a ritual satanic killing. We brought in a police-accredited psychic investigator who definitely and confirmed that 10 children were buried in a cultic configuration near the grounds of that Kamloops Catholic school. And a summons was issued against Elizabeth Windsor on that basis for her to answer questions if she had knowledge of the disappearance and fate of those children. She never answered. Her lawyer and office never answered that charge. And we did confirm that Queen Elizabeth was in Canada during October 1964 on a state visit. We also confirmed that William Coombs, the one surviving eyewitness to the disappearance of those children, was forced to a Catholic hospital the very week he was to come to London, England to give testimony about what he witnessed in February 2011. We had a forum set up in England where he was to give that testimony. At the week before he was to get on the plane, he was ordered to report to the St. Paul's Catholic Hospital in downtown Vancouver by the police, who bodily took him, arrested him without a warrant or charge, took him to the Catholic hospital. He was put under examination, and according to his partner May, he was given a series of injections which put him into a coma. Less than 12 hours later, he was then pulled off life support system without permission or knowledge of his family, and he died. He was murdered in that hospital by lethal injection because he was the one sole surviving witness to that action by Queen Elizabeth. Now, that same period of time in early 2011, I was expelled from England in May 2011, arrested and deported from the country without any kind of charge being laid. And I was invited at the same time to come to Mohawk territory in Canada to the site of the oldest Indian residential school, the Mohawk School, run by the Church of England and the Crown of England as far back as 1832, where eyewitnesses had seen satanic killings. We conducted the first archaeological excavation of a mass grave site in history at an Indian residential school in Canada there. We uncovered bits of bones and clothing off school uniforms. The Smithsonian Institute in Washington confirmed that 3 of those bones had come off the body of a young girl, perhaps 5 years old. Dr. Donald Ortner, who confirmed that those bones had come off a human being, died of a heart attack 2 months later, even though he was 69 years old and in perfect health. All of the witnesses to those crimes disappeared or went silent, and our excavation was shut down by government-sponsored Indian chiefs and the Anglican Church. As a matter of fact, an order came from the Archbishop of Canterbury that all of the evidence implicating the royal family in those deaths were to be destroyed. Bishop Bob Bennett and Fred Hiltz, the Archbishop of Canada, were all ordered their employees on pain of firing and worse to be quiet about this, and an enormous smear campaign was started in the media against myself and the ITCCS to shut down that investigation. I mention those events of 2011 because it shows what we're up against, but also the guilt of the powerful and how we have brought out solid evidence that the Queen of England and those institutions are guilty of crimes against humanity and personally killing and disappearing children. Now, that could be one of the reasons that I was detained and not prevented from coming to the Czech Republic to speak to you all today. In the United States and Canada, detained, prevented from traveling, expelled from England under continual harassment and other forms of blacklisting continually. And people have to ask, well, why would this continue to be happening against Kevin Annett if this was just about crimes of the past? It isn't. It's about crimes of the present. Crimes that are ongoing, that are killing children as we speak. As I mentioned, August 15th, there will be killings conducted by the Ninth Circle cult, probably involving top cardinals, if not Pope Francis himself, and top people like George Soros, who's the largest financial backer of Hillary Clinton. He's one of her main advisors. He's an active participant in the Ninth Circle. And this will be going on in midnight on August 15th in Marie de la Monde Cathedral in Montreal, in the largest Catholic cathedral in Washington, D.C., in the San Lorenzo Jesuit Church in downtown Rome, just 2 blocks from the Vatican, and in the largest Catholic cathedrals in London, England. Now, people have an obligation to do something about that. We were able to stop such a ritual killing by the Ninth Circle on August 15th, 2014 in Montreal. We stopped that and saved the lives of 2 children who were going to be killed that night. Some of the honest elements within Interpol conducted arrests across Europe during 2015, arrests of over 1,000 people involved in the child trafficking of children for the Ninth Circle. 30 children were let out of cages. These children were being held in cages in basements in Brussels and around Belgium and the Netherlands. These children were brought from Portugal and Romania and also North Africa. They're also trafficked right within the child welfare system within these governments, and that's how a lot of it happens today, right within the government system. Children are trafficked. These children were let go. We saved the lives of these children because we didn't simply publish the evidence. We went to the police and we said, if you're not going to arrest these people, we are. We are going to form common law sheriff bands to go in and stop these people and arrest them. And if necessary, keep them confined in jails in order to stop these children from being killed. We found that once we threaten the police in this way, they act. They have acted in Canada, they've acted elsewhere in Europe because they know they don't want the citizens taking the law into their own hands, which is what we must do to save the lives of the innocent. So one thing I would urge the listeners and anyone listening today to do is conduct vigils outside those churches all throughout the day and night of August 15th. That's only in just a few weeks. We want you to publish this evidence and broadcast this YouTube link everywhere. We want you to form your own citizen-based common law sheriff groups to conduct the citizen arrests against any known child-raping priest in your community, any known Catholic priest who's involved in the harming of children. And we know that any Catholic priest is part of the criminal conspiracy, so they're all guilty. But it's time for the citizens to take the law back into their own hands, because we know at every level, the police, the government, the authorities, the courts are all involved in protecting this global child trafficking and child killing network. Finally, I want to say that a part of the work of the ITCCS has gone to another level, not just spiritually, which we've talked about. We recognize the need for people now to actively withdraw from these systems of power. We're not just talking about not paying taxes anymore to your government. We're talking about withdrawing from this entire global corporate system that is at the heart of this child murder and the destruction of everything, from the loss of our world, the destruction of our environment, chemtrails, the mind control programs, the wars of aggression being conducted. All of those can be traced to the same corporatocracy that is ruining our planet and killing our children and ourselves, and creating one global police state around the world. We know that people have the capacity to change and stop this system. I mean, look at myself. I was a single clergyman on the west coast of Canada with no support, no money, no one around him. Just by tenacity, I was able to build a movement in Canada which forced this change. Now, if you multiply that 100-fold, imagine what we can do if we unite. And that's the key now, to overcome our individual differences, our animosities, our different interpretations of what this crime is all about, and find our common ground. That common ground consists of three things: our children, who are our future, our planet Earth, which is our future, and our sacred, God-given liberties of the common law, which is inherent in every human being. If we can unite on the basis of defending our liberties, our planet, and our children, that is our program. That is our common law basis. No other difference matters. That transcends every political, every religious, every sectarian difference, every ideological difference. If we do not unite, we are finished. We do not have a future. We have shown how we can unite. We have shown how we can put the powerful on trial and stop their system. Now it's a matter of doing. We have all the information we need. We have all the evidence we need. It's not a matter of evidence. It's a matter of action now and reclaiming our souls. When I was involved with the Mohawk people in uncovering the mass grave at the Mohawk School in Brantford, Ontario, the Mohawk people there have actively reclaimed their land. It's a reclamation movement. They gather the people together and they stop the bulldozers from continuing to destroy their land. They put their bodies between the machinery and that which would destroy them. We have to do that now with our bodies. And it's all about reclamation, reclaiming our souls, our minds, and our world. I work with people in England who are stopping the authorities from going into their homes and taking their children. And we have to build that kind of movement. So when I come to Europe in October, this is the kind of work I do. I organize common law training workshops where we equip people with the knowledge and the means and the confidence to elect their own common law sheriffs, to make the citizen arrest, to issue the arrest warrants against those in power. And you will find that when the citizens take that action, the authorities will follow. We will change from the grassroots up, not by making appeals to these authorities, to the powers that be. Forget the powers that be. You know, forget even our protests, which even the most militant protest is designed to ask something from the authorities. We ask nothing from them. We are taking back our power. We are ignoring their system and building our own new systems based on the common law and liberty. Now, I just want to close because I know we're at 50 minutes. It isn't quite 1 hour, but my throat is giving out. And even a preacher is not used, at least in my tradition, isn't used to preaching for a whole hour. So I think I'll stop it at that. But I want to close with a few points. I want to again remind people of our site, itccs.org, and murderbydecree.com. My two new books, Unrelenting Between Sodom and Zion, and Murder by Decree, the crime of genocide in Canada, written as a counter-report to the government's cover-up of these crimes. And I want to urge people to read that. That's really the best way to get a knowledge of our movement and what's happened and all of this evidence is by reading those two books. And you get that through Amazon.com. Now, prior to me coming to Europe, I also want to remind people that we need to do preparatory work. We need to be reaching out to the survivors and those on the ground on any issue. And I don't want to restrict this to genocide, to child trafficking, to satanic killing. We want to reach out to all those fighting for liberty, for the lives of their children, for this future of Mother Earth, for all of our liberties. And we want to unite in a great and powerful grassroots common law movement. I will be coming to Europe, speaking in over half a dozen countries now. And if you want to get a hold of me to book me into speaking, please come to the conference in Prague, October, I believe it's 7th to 9th, but Alexander can tell you more about that. Please write to me, hiddenfromhistory1, that's number 1, hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com, and also ITCCS office, that's ITCCS office@gmail.com. Also, the emails are continually tampered with on the movement, so I want to leave a telephone number you can reach me at in America. That telephone number is area code 386-323-5774 in America, international code number 1-386-323-5774. I will get the messages, but again, write to me, hiddenfromhistory1, that's number 1, hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com. Now, I want to close by thanking all of you, by asking you to use this knowledge and not simply be inspired by it, but be inspired to act on it. Allow it to change your life. Most importantly, allow the stories and the spirit of those who have fallen to enter into you and to lead you on to act fearlessly. And the greatest enemy we face, of course, is fear and the divide and conquer methods they use and suspicion. It's said that great love drives out all fear, and I found that to be true. Even when my children were taken from me, even when my best friends were being killed, and I've lost 9 friends in this to foul play, both Aboriginal and non-Native, who were being killed by the state and by the church because of what they knew. Those people, they keep my strength going. Memory of those who have come before us keep us going, and we have to turn to them, to our higher power in whatever way you experience that higher power, to God, to my personal friend Jesus, and to all of our warriors who are right now living and dying to keep the truth alive and to fight for our future as the human race. So I want to thank you all. I look forward to seeing you all in person. I want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, Alexander Berg and all of those wonderful people in Prague who have awarded me this honor of the Prague Peace Prize and who've shown such confidence in me. I will honor that by continuing this until the day I die, and even then beyond that, in this struggle for all of us and for the children. I thank you, and may God bless us all. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you so much. You are a man of great personal courage and in very difficult times. And I hope you will come safe home to Vancouver from New York. And I hope we can see you here all on the 9th of October in this room. Thank you so
Alexander.
much.
Thank you, and I wish I could go home right away, but I can't, unfortunately. I'll be coming to Europe before I come to Canada. But I thank you. I will see you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye. Yeah, it was Kevin Annett, of course, and he is a man of great courage, and I must say that all of the speakers, can you hear me now? All of the speakers are men and a woman of great personal courage, that they came here and could speak to us in very difficult times. We could take a break now, some 15 minutes, and then we can talk more about false flag operations and other things. Then then before 5 we take another break and prepare for the speech of martial masters who will speak about Nibiru, and I can tell a few things about Nibiru before 5. So I see you here in 15 minutes. Thank you.